Hey everyone, welcome to connectedlearning.tv. This is our 38th webinar in our series on connected learning since we launched in March. And so far our webinar content has been viewed in over 100 countries. We've really enjoyed seeing a really diverse community develop over these past several months. To those watching on live stream, we encourage you to use the chat stream there to introduce yourselves, connect with each other, share resources, and maybe most importantly, post questions for the people in the Hangout today that we're grateful to be having with us. The URL for our public group notes Google Doc for today should be included in the live stream chat. We would love your assistance in capturing highlights or sharing resources today in that document, which will be shared widely after our time today. And the topic for today is how do disenfranchised youth use new media to mount and sustain social movements. And we're very honored to be joined by a great group today. And before our main speakers, Zimmerman and Sangita Shresthova, take the floor to help us frame today's conversation, I wanted to give the others in our Hangout a chance to introduce themselves. And I guess it's you, Imelda. We can't hear you. You're
Yeah. Yes, hello. My name is Imelda Placencia, and I'm a community organizer for the Immigrant Youth Movement at the Dream Resource Center in Southern California, working on the Circle Project, which addresses emotional health of undocumented youth, and Queer Dream Summer, which bridges the gap between the immigrant and the LGBTQ community.
Great. I think we're going to be joined in a moment by Liana Thompson. So we'll go ahead and go to our presentation today, and then we can introduce Liana in a moment. So today's discussion is led by Sangita Shresthova and Zimmerman, and Sangita is the research director for Civic Paths, which is a group based at University of Southern California that examines online participatory culture and civic engagement. Aurelie is a postdoc research associate alumnus for Civic Paths, and both Aurelie and Sangita are also part of the Youth and Participatory Politics Research Network MAP team, which is Media Activism Participatory Politics, which is also based at University of Southern California. So I think we want to go ahead and get started, unless that is Liana. Is that Liana? Liana, you there?
Yep.
We're just about ready to get started with the presentation. Go ahead and introduce yourself and your name and then your connection to the topic and the work.
All right, I'm Leanna Gamber-Thompson, and I'm a researcher at USC working on the MAP team, and I'm actually studying young libertarians, so a little bit different end of the spectrum, but one of the case studies that we're doing for this research.
Okay, great. Good timing too, by the way.
Good.
All right, Aurelie and Sangita, go ahead and kick us off here.
So what I will do, I'm going to start, and then Aurelie will take over because she actually has the really juicy material to share for this webinar here. But what I thought I would do is just provide a little bit of context for everybody in terms of what MAP does and who we are. So what I'm going to do is share a very brief PowerPoint right now. Okay, share selected. Oh, there. Okay, so the media. Can everybody see it? Is that what you're seeing now? Because
yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So the Media Activism and Participatory Politics Project, based at USC, it really looks at, well, this is weird, I can't see my own PowerPoint. Okay, now I can see it. I was speaking blindly for a second there. It is really part and parcel of a larger network of projects that is funded by MacArthur Foundation that operates under the umbrella of Youth and Participatory Politics Network that Jeff already introduced. And while we will be speaking about projects that are just based in MAP, I did think it was important to sort of signal that the research that we'll be speaking about today is actually part of a larger project and a larger effort to really understand how youth are using new media and how that's changing the way we think about politics, or in this case, what we're naming participatory politics, and how that's changing, number one, how youth relate to each other in terms of their peer relationships, how they organize and mobilize, and also how they are in turn changing their relationship to institutional politics or to more formal political spaces. So within MAP, when Areli came on board, wow, there's a dog barking.
Oops, sorry. I'll let me put it on mute.
Yeah, you can put yourself on mute. That was funny.
We have commentary already.
I know. Somebody's quite angry about what I'm saying. So when we first started this project 3 years ago, we were tasked with coming forward with 4 exemplar cases that would show spaces that where youth are doing really innovative work. And here I just have a small listing of the criteria that we use, which are important if you think about the different cases that we have. So we were interested in cases that would engage participatory culture as defined by Henry Jenkins. Because we're a participatory politics group, we were interested in civics and politics, very broadly defined. We were looking at sustained efforts that were networked, that were innovative within their landscape, and that will become important as Areli also speaks about the Dreamer case. And we were interested in movements or in efforts that combine traditional mobilizing strategies with new media. And lastly, kind of alluding to Liana's case, we were interested in instances that span a broad ideological spectrum. So we wanted cases that were conservative, we wanted cases that were progressive, we wanted cases that actually fell out of that did not fall evenly into those categories. So after much effort, what we came up with was a group of cases that you can see here. The first one that was conducted was actually the one on dream activism that Areli will be speaking about. The second one that Liana came on board to do was looking at young libertarians, and she ended up looking at Students for Liberty, which I'm sure she'll do a webinar on later, sometime later. The third case was a cluster of organizations around the Harry Potter Alliance, which is a group that mobilizes for social good around the Harry Potter narratives, sort of taking the metaphors of evil and good from those stories to the real world, and takes on issues like global warming, marriage equality, etc. And then finally, I took on a case to look at Muslim American youth and how we can really think about a post 9/11 generation growing up in the United States and how they use new media to express their identities. So without further ado, I'm actually going to turn it over to Areli, who's going to speak about the Dreamer case study that she conducted and that she actually wrote a report on about a year ago, and the report is actually already lives on our site and lives on the DML site. So I'm sure she'll refer people to it.
Are you guys seeing the first slide now?
Yes, we're seeing a slide that says documenting dreams.
Great,
Yeah.
Great. Okay, great. So I only have about 10 slides prepared, so we'll have plenty of time for discussion. Let's, since Sangita already introduced sort of the background of this, let me start by providing, for those that are not in the Hangout but are following us live stream, some data about the current demographics. There are 5 million undocumented youth in the United States today. Over 1 million live in California alone. Most arrived before the age of 5. Latinos represent 78% of this population, and 65,000 undocumented minors graduate from high school each year. Recently, a colleague of mine here at USC, Veronica Terriquez, along with, I think, the help of Imelda, who's joined us, and Undocumented Youth, fielded a survey. So we have a sort of a one-of-a-kind information on the demographic backgrounds and the experiences of undocumented youth leaders, let me say, in California. So this is a visual that reflects, the ages of youth upon their arrival in the United States. And as you can see, over 80% actually come to the United States before the age of 11.
I think you need to change the next slide, Areli, on your screen.
I'm sorry?
Are you still on your introductory slide? Because we're still seeing the introductory slide.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah, no. I'm ahead of you guys.
Yeah, there you go.
Let me try something else, I guess.
It works now. When you change it, it works. So now we're on the third slide.
Okay. Can you guys see it well?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pie chart. If you go to normal view as opposed to full screen or slideshow, you'll be fine.
Okay, that's fine. Then I'll just keep it on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because what do you see now?
A pie chart.
How about here? Now.
Still seeing a pie chart with the age breakdown.
Okay. All right. We'll just do a normal view then. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
okay, so normal view's best. Okay, I'm gonna make it as large as possible. Okay, so What's important to understand about activists in California, the undocumented youth activists here in California, is that their level of poverty and their socioeconomic indicators are well below the average youth population. So 80+% of these activists come from a low income background. Most have had difficulty paying utility bills. Almost 70% have no health insurance, and close to 90% have had difficulty paying for college. The reason why I signal to this is that it presents a very curious paradox for those that study civic engagement. The normal sort of idea is that civic engagement has been closely tied to both education and income. As we're seeing here amongst undocumented youth, Tariqas and Patler in 2012 assert that undocumented youth leaders are significantly more likely to be involved in their schools and in their communities than their peers in the general population. So here you see the rates of civic engagement amongst these youth in California. Over 80% have volunteered within the last year, have worked on a community issue, and also they show high levels of political efficacy. They feel that they can make a difference. So several studies have looked at this paradox. How is it that youth who confront so many barriers to political participation and civic engagement, why is it that they exhibit higher rates than average California youth? And these studies have proposed, that it really revolves around four key things. One is that being active provides a sense of belonging for these youth when confronting forms of legal objection. It's a form of identity affirmation. It's a way to build cultural and social capital, and it is they use these forms of civic and engagement as strategies to confront feelings of alienation. So how about digital participation? Most of these studies have looked at civic engagement in a more traditional sense. I think we're one of the first to really be looking systematically at media use amongst this group. And just to give you a background in terms of what's been studied about on the topic of digital participation, scholars have moved beyond sort of the idea of an access gap amongst racial minorities to looking at a participation gap, right? So the concern isn't necessarily about access anymore as it is about the quality of time of Latino and Black youth spent online. Watkins, in an article that was published this year, I think says it perfectly. He says we need to examine media literacy tied to social action, right? How do youth use information effectively and in the context of specific life situations in order to enable constructive social action? In his own study on post-Katrina use amongst teens, he says teens use social media for important social ties during great upheaval, for a sense of social support and emotional security. And I gesture to his work because I think it sets up rather well the segue into our own study here at MAP. This case study of a undocumented youth activist was not only in California. We did do interviews and studied youth who are located in other states, but the majority did come from California. We conducted 25 qualitative interviews. We conducted an ethnography that was both digital and we have also fielded a survey of media use and civic engagement amongst California undocumented youth activists. So the report contains obviously a much more detailed analysis, but just to sort of talk to you a little bit about our initial findings. In this study, we found that leaders' rates of civic and political engagement positively correlate with digital media literacies. On the one hand, youth who were able to take advantage of online and social and build online social and culture capital because of their innovative and because of their understanding of how to use social media in particular. On the other hand, those that come to the movement maybe without having a deep level of digital media literacy. Those that did participate gained and enhanced their literacy and their skills online. So I think that's the piece that I want to focus on today. So why is it that this is the case? I argue in the work that the movement itself has placed an emphasis on networked forms of communication and peer-to-peer media training, both in terms of traditional broadcast media, but also social media. So Imelda might be able to speak to this a little bit more. Nancy Mesa was going to join us earlier today, but couldn't make it. And all the activists that we surveyed had some form of media training. Some were even in the process of conducting peer-to-peer media training for other youth. The organizations that we studied, many were media-centered and had actually started their organization vis-a-vis online social networks, right? And as Sangita has pointed to in the case study, technology, as we know, is low cost and there's low threshold for participation. So these youth have effectively used microblogging, Facebook blogs, and have set up, their own web pages using WordPress and whatnot. I characterize three phases of this movement and its relationship with media. The first phase is collective identification. And in this phase was really when youth were mobilizing to pass the DREAM Act in 2010. And there were high hopes that there would be some kind of immigration reform under President Obama's first administration. We're looking at a slide here of Julio Salgado's work. I want to make sure to give him credit, which was a youth artist who, he's a journalist, but since he can't work as a journalist because of his status, began to use multimedia and his digital artwork on behalf of the movement. And this is one of his images. So this phase of collective identification was basically coming out of the shadows, using YouTube and things of that nature to come out, both in some cases as undocumented, in some cases as both queer and undocumented. And this was an incredible way for youth to connect with others via online without sort of the vulnerability of a public outing per se. The movement has significantly changed, obviously, because of the political opportunities and context. And when and no legislative action was seen as a possibility, youth have increasingly turned towards direct action. And this has obviously affected media use, right? So the ability to use media to, for instance, in this graphic image, to bring attention to deportations and secure communities, which is a policy that has resulted in the highest rates of deportation in the country's history. So youth were really one of the first to, speak out against President Obama. Some of the additional civic and immigrant rights leaders were weary of this kind of strategy, but it was something that youth really pushed. And so this is definitely sort of a second phase, and I think we're still sort of in that phase, but political opportunities have also changed, right? President Obama implemented, came out with his policy known as like the Morton Memo, in which he started to say that youth that were eligible for the DREAM Act would not, in fact, be deported or be signaled for deportations. And he also announced DACA, right, which was a deferred action policy for childhood arrivals. And I think this has really significantly changed media use as well, right? So the questions that I think we have moving forward is, what role will digital media play as new political opportunities open and others close? So for instance, a legal scholar, Michael Olivas, who's been a supporter of the DREAM Act and DREAM activist himself, has said that using digital media to out oneself is selfish, right? Going and doing these kinds of direct action and civil disobedience outside of ICE is not necessarily the best strategy, because it would jeopardize a youth's chances for DACA, to qualify for DACA. In my own sort of media ethnography, I've noticed that many of the sites that we were studying before, such as the Dream is Coming, for instance, which was a website that was really pushing direct action and showing youth storming the Capitol and doing sit-ins and whatnot has actually gone offline. So we're really seeing sort of the opportunities and the limits of new media, the possibilities that it presents, but also the dangers it presents in this era of surveillance and in which youth really have to prove their worthiness of these kinds of temporary statuses or deferred action. So I guess I'll conclude with just recapping some of the initial summary conclusions that I came to in the report, which was that I had said that new media is a powerful tool for youth in legally vulnerable contexts, right? For the purposes of identity, connection, and mobilization. The social networks fostered through new media become potential sources of social and political capital and collective action. But at the same time, it presents a double-edged sword, right? In the context of new realities in which DACA and things of that nature, are looking for youth who are morally virtuous and have earned their right to be Americans, if you will. And I'm not sure how political protest and civil disobedience plays a part of that. And then fourthly, one of the things that I bring up in the report is that I want to make sure that we understand that many of these youth, those that have been part of the movement, that part of the activists, are also pursuing higher education, have been able to access higher education, whereas many youth still have not been able to do that. And the importance of contextual support and institutional support is very much needed to sustain broad forms of participation, along with or as a support to new media.
That was really interesting. Thanks for drawing out some of the main parts of the report. I want to say I read the entire report, and some of the really powerful parts of it are the stories. You have many stories in there, and some great quotations. So I know John will put the link to the report there, but it's really compelling stuff. But thank you so much for doing that. I wanted to give Imelda and then Leanna a chance to weigh in.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you, Areli, for sharing that. I know I also participated in the interviews for the social media, and I'm happy to see everything that has manifested and developed. I wanted to add, I guess, just the lives of undocumented youth and how social media is very much ingrained. It is a priority for undocumented youth to have a communications team, a marketing team, not only what is being posted, but we're very conscious of the framing of how undocumented youth are being discussed and what that means for our communities, for our families. So a lot of I guess, misconceptions that we want to be able to clarify through our social media about our community. So very much using it as a form of education in addition to empowering. I wanted to see, Areli, is there a way to view your PowerPoint? I kind of just wanted to.
Yeah, I can put it back up. No problem. Tell me what slides you want me to go to.
Yeah, so on towards the end, I know you touched a bit about DACA and the implications that it may have on youth that have previously participated. We have yet the way that it worked out is that undocumented youth have been organizing the free clinics across the country to alleviate some of the costs, so bringing in our resources to have these free clinics. It's the immigrant youth leaders within the movement that have been organizing these events, so often are the ones that haven't applied yet for DACA. And so a lot of them now, as it's not as heavy workload as it was in the initial months, people are starting to turn in their DACA applications, and we have yet to see what their involvement in civil disobedience will be, and how that will impact, if at all, their DACA application. Right. So that is something that we are very much aware of and are being conscious of as we move forward. I think immigrant youth, because of the legislative gains that have been made, are more visible and are a part of dominant culture. And so we're also being very cautious as we move forward within our social media. I know students that have, unless there was an event, unless there was a formal introduction, are more hesitant to add people on their Facebook. But generally, Facebook, it has been a place where a lot of people have also, I guess, kind of it's not so much of I guess, of a personal form of media. It's definitely used as something that is intentional to organize. So a lot of students have a personal one and a professional networking one. Could we go back to some of the slides, Adelie?
Yeah. Which one do you want to go to?
I just the last slides on your findings.
This is the okay.
Or is there a way where I can see it independently of the screen share?
I don't know. I could email it to you maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, this is so basically, yeah, so my findings here, I think you guys are looking at the slide of my findings. But basically what I had said was that that folks that we talked to, right, were those who had, were highly engaged online as well, right? But I also wanted to point to the fact that participating in the social movement itself brought folks even higher levels of digital and online engagement. So for instance, some folks had said, well, I had never really used this platform, but I figured it out. I asked around folks that were not necessarily filmmakers, but decided because of the movement and because of like you said, the necessity to get out, make sure that youth were being represented in the right way, picked up a camera for the first time, so that's kind of the thing that I wanted to make sure to point out, I guess, because this is the area that I guess I wanted to focus on today. I don't know if you had any comments on that.
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to jump in and say I'm pulling up the PowerPoint on my screen, so maybe you'll be able to see it a little bit. Okay. I don't know which slide you wanted to go up, because I really didn't see it on yours.
Well, just to add to Arely's comment, there is a strong emphasis on within our immigrant youth movement of being able to take control of our own message, being able, for example, the DREAM Act and how it has been framed has been very problematic within our communities and divisive in a sense. So being able to take social media to be able to reframe some of these conversations to how we want them to be directed. I think that we have been able to recognize our power above anything else as a community through social media.
That's a great way to put it.
Leanna, I think you had a comment here.
Yeah, so Imelda touched on this a little bit already, but I'm really interested in the media training that Aurelie described earlier. She talks a little bit about in her report. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about like how formal it was. So was it mostly peer-to-peer, just sort of informal, like, hey, I don't know how to use this platform, like teach me how to use Twitter, or teach me how to use, WordPress, or was it more sort of formal in the groups? And I'm really interested in what Imelda said about kind of, and what you alluded to at the end, Aurelie, about kind of having to pull back a little bit with DACA, right? And how people portray themselves. And so how has there been kind of a pull back a little bit in terms of these media trainings?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think Imelda might be able to also speak to this question about the peer-to-peer media trainings. I think it's unfortunate that both Juan and Nancy weren't able to join us, but I can say, firstly, Juan, who was invited to join us today but couldn't make it because he had to work. He's the one that actually he's the founder of dreamactivist.org. He's one of the founders, and he also was the one that ran the peer-to-peer media training. So he actually, the question of how formal was it is an interesting one, because I would qualify it as informal in the sense that there wasn't an institutional support. It wasn't done with any kind of institutional resources of any kind. It was done through the website dreamactivists.org. They had, and at the same time, there was formal aspects of it. There were applications that dreamactivists.org accepted for what they were calling media interns. There was the training was done all via the phone conferencing, so it was a free way to kind of connect on phone conferencing. And there were key assignments that Juan decided to use. He himself had gone to various media trainings, and he wanted to share that with other undocumented youth. So in a way, it was interesting question, right? Because is it formal or is it informal? It was informal in the sense that there wasn't institutional support, resources, etc., and it was very much peer-to-peer. But at the same time, like exactly what Imelda's saying, it was strategic, right? It was done with in mind the idea that these folks were going to be using their media skills to go back to their hometowns and participate in a movement, and one in which framing is really key, right? So there was, a lot of attention to that, to what platforms would best serve that purpose, right? So that's one of the interesting things. And in terms of and I know that the one that I was able to take part in didn't actually have a long life. It was aborted because of the leaders who couldn't sustain it, right? On the other hand, I know Nancy and Dream Team LA and Imelda have had media trainings and workshops that are much more formal, right? And Imelda might be able to speak to that. So I'll make sure, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Imelda, if you want to say anything to that question.
Yeah, to add, Areli, within Dream Team LA, they've also had media trainings, Julio Salgado, as well as some members of Dreamers Adrift, and Nancy Mesa, that initially really took a lot of initiative on their part to be able to use social media, and they wanted to be intentional about building a media team. Not only have they built Dreamers of Drift, but they've also created UndocuTV, which is some sort of our own sort of news media broadcasters that they've used. In terms of the formality and I guess the structure of these trainings, our trainings within the immigrant youth movement are really based out of the needs in our community. So, for example, when there wasn't any information about AB 540, a PowerPoint was created, and people took the initiative to reach out to their networks and disperse this information. The same thing has been done with media. How can we use media to be able to move forward our movement? And so trainings have been developed to address that need, to intentionally build that. Liana, you said you had a question.
Actually, let me jump in here with something a little broader I wanted to ask about. So one thing I was struck by when reading through the paper and the examples is it seems like there's some great takeaways for youth, educators, activists who on other issues. And so I'm curious to know what you all would say that you observed and learned in doing this project that you think are takeaways for like youth who may be interested in issues in their own community, or how they could localize or personalize the practices that worked really, really well with this, how they might migrate over to other youth and activists and educators.
That's a great question. One of the things that comes to mind with that question is that I think Mimi Ito calls it, what does Mimi Ito call it? Transferable skills? She calls it something. Anyways, we'll come back to Mimi Ito. But
I think it's translation, maybe translation.
Is that what it is?
I have a feeling. Maybe Jeff
But
knows.
anyway, one of the that we did see was that one, youth that were involved in this movement and this kind of activism had many of them had started being active in other realms and in other areas of social justice, right? That's definitely one thing that I was able to follow them for about a year and a half and see how many of them, right, that started, let's say, on in a campus or student organization, had moved to found, for instance, LGBT groups, HIV advocacy, other forms of civic engagement in the ways in which they were able to use some of the things that they had learned and the ways in which they had the organizational skills, the fundraising skills, all the kinds of skills needed and that they picked up and learned in the context of undocumented youth activism that they've been able to apply in other contexts. That's something that was really important, and I think is something that stands out to me, because just to see how many of these youth are involved in various different things, not just undocumented youth activism, but they were active in other areas. In terms of what other youth can use or apply into their own lives, I mean, I don't know what Imelda would say, but I think that the idea that that youth who are the ways in which youth learn, right? Something that is really interesting, because in many of the interviews we asked or we probed how their learning was different, right, than what they would learn in school, right? And they had so much to say about this, right? Again, going back to the peer-to-peer training, right? The ways in which youth learn from each other, the ways in which youth were able to learn, by doing rather than by listening or by someone pontificating. So the actual practice of it, the idea of pursuing a passion, right? Something that, anything, whether many of these youth have so many passions, they're creative writers, they are artists, many of them. In fact, it's an interesting thing, because many of these folks talked about how, because of the fact that they weren't able to pursue their profession or their careers, like journalists or, anything that they really wanted to, or go to law school, many of these students or youth have not been able to pursue, a traditional path because of their status. So many of these youth turn to their artistic and their creative personalities and their talents, and use them within the movement. So it's really interesting to see how youth that use to really connect how youth connect with their passions, with their creative and artistic sides, lends itself very much to civic engagement. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to uplift in this report.
I just wanted to add, Arely, also, it's definitely an avenue and an outlet. It's also an opportunity for immigrant youth who are at different comfort levels of coming out, that don't feel comfortable maybe appearing at an action or being outspoken in person, but through social media are comfortable doing so. And it's in a sense, they feel safer because the people that are connected within their network are people that they know. So it's also, we talk about different levels of participation and activism, and it's definitely an outlet for our youth that are just starting to be a part of the movement as
Sangita, I think you had a point about another translatable.
Yeah, well, actually, building off of, and I want to bring to the table some of the other cases we have as well, because there are certainly many specific things about the Dreamer case. But as we are now starting to think across the different cases we have in MAP, there are really two things that I want to highlight that really I feel already have been mentioned, but also come up in our other cases, and therefore signal that this might be something that may apply to youth more broadly. One is what Imelda just talked about, the different ways of participating, and I think that's a really crucial piece because. All of our cases really have very low thresholds to participation, so to borrow Henry's work around participatory culture. But that also means different ways to participate. You know, they really value any skill or any ability that people bring to the table. They also value any level of comfort to participate, whether it's online, whether it's in person in a demonstration, whether it's by creating art, or whether it's by joining a debate or, you know, even mobilizing in DC, whatnot. But they also they really don't have the same sort of expectation of what a member is or what a member does. And that really seems to encourage participation in a way that maybe more traditional organizations, now I'm sort of in unknown territory because I'm not so familiar with traditional organizational mobilizing and structures, but I feel like those maybe have higher thresholds in terms of what it means to be a member and maybe more set expectations, and all in comparison to the cases that we have on the table. And the other piece that I feel like also may be something that may translate to that may help facilitate some translation to other contexts is really looking at what Netta Kligler-Vilenchik in our group is calling mobilizing structures, which is really to look at how a movement like the Dreamers or the Dreamers really build on existing new media practices, but then build supports on top of those that facilitate direct action. So it's not only about pointing the camera at yourself and making a video of yourself and then hoping that it will maybe get views, but it's really an ability to know that you can upload it to the site, which will help scaffold it being seen and help it kind of become part of a larger collective storytelling activity. Or like Areli was talking about, this very informal media training that she participated in that actually had some pretty specific and formal components to it that actually were thought through. And this ability to sort of scaffold almost, I don't know if that's the right word, but definitely build on top of practices that exist and that seem quite, that, you know, exist in interest group, friendship-driven groups online and beyond, and being able to sort of help translate those into more civically directed action or civically impactful action by having these mobilizing structures seems like a key insight. And that may also help kind of abstract some of the learnings from the specific case to other instances.
There were two moments that I wanted to ask you about, Areli and maybe Imelda, that I thought were really interesting. At one point, you say that you recount that the youth leaders, they grew really impatient with traditional mainstream channels for progress. And then there's this other moment that you talk about where they hadn't actually met each other physically or face to face, the founders, I guess, for like 2 years, and yet they were doing all this work together. I thought that was quite interesting. I was interested to hear more about the sort of the realization that the mainstream channels are not going to lead to progress. And then all the work they had accomplished online, and then that sort of physical meeting, that first physical meeting.
Yeah, the story and the story that I gestured to in the report for those who haven't read it is the story of dreamactivist.org. And it's true that they did meet. They actually, you know, it's really interesting because what Imelda is saying is so true. Over the last 6-7 years, youth have really taken, you know, the idea of framing this, making sure that they frame the issues the way in which they want, you know, the way in which they want to do it without kind of relying on other folks to kind of frame it for them. And the dreamactivist.org site is an interesting example because after the DREAM Act failed in 2007, I believe, I'm not sure, I think it should be in the report, but it was I think it was after the first round of votes, you know, the Democrats weren't able to, you know, get enough votes to get the DREAM Act heard on the floor, voted on. And that it was during this time that 4 or 5 youth from different states, you know, come together and they're sort of trolling on this chat forum. I believe it was an MSN chat that was set up. It was a page that was not really interactive. It was on the DREAM Act. It was a DREAM Act portal. I've been told that it was run by a supporter in New York who had set it up to kind of give updates on the DREAM Act legislation. And then these youth met in this chat room, and they realized that they were all in the same position. They were all facing similar challenges of not being able to go to college, not being able to, they had graduated high school and were, these were all, highly achieving students that were not able to move forward with their education. So they did, meet in that room and then decided to chat off, outside of this forum, because apparently the person who maintained the forum was not too happy with how active they were. So they decided to go to another platform to communicate. And yeah, they came together and they decided that they needed to have a page that was not only looking at legislation, but one in which, like Imelda was saying, would provide information, education, versus an advocacy for undocumented youth across the country. So they worked for 2 years to put together information that is actually still quite useful about different states, state policies, what youth needed to be able to go to a 2-year college or a 4-year college, what was the differences in the ways in which states dealt with undocumented youth and higher education. And so the first in-person thing was 2 years later in 2009, when they came together to do the first DREAM Act graduation. It was a symbolic graduation that many youth DREAM activists used to, gesture to the fact that they were they wanted just access to higher education. That was one of the key things that they wanted in the movement, and obviously a path to citizenship. But that was the first time that they actually met. And so their stories about meeting for the first time are quite interesting, because they had worked for 2 years together, but had actually never met in person. And many of them have gone on to participate in the movement in different ways. Some of them are still working with DREAM activists. Others, from my understanding, have gone on to be leaders, and in the South particularly, because since 2007, there's really been, southern states have really gone to extreme modes of like banning undocumented youth from college, for instance. So many of the youth that started out with DREAM activists are now doing sort of more on the ground traditional organizing, still using civil disobedience, but it's been interesting to follow the leadership trajectories of each of those youth who came together initially with dreamactivist.org.
Maybe this is a question for you, Imelda, but I'm curious to know what do you think the impact of this experience, all that the Dreamers have learned and the people they've connected with, the lessons they've taken away, the successes, how do you think that will impact them going forward in terms of their involvement in civics and politics and all that? What's the lasting impact of that?
I was just reflecting on how Areli mentioned participation in various other social movements. And I think especially with the undocuqueer movement, recognizing parallel depressions and recognizing that these types of attacks are happening to communities across the board. So within social media, a lot of our youth have not only addressed issues of immigrant rights, but also of LGBTQ rights, what's going on in Palestine, the prison industrial complex, healthcare, all of those things that very much align and intersect within not just our movement, but our lives, that we recognize are issues that we want to be a part of. So being a part of the immigrant youth movement, you're able to recognize these similar oppressions, and thus people have been able to branch out to other interests. A lot of people are very much involved in the movement because they recognize that there is a need for them to do so. It is very much personal, but there are various interests in other social movements that students have been able to participate through social media. In terms of trajectory, it's been interesting to see the various fields that undocumented youth are a part of and how they're using social justice within their various fields. For example, within the health field, the project that we're working on, the Circle project at the Dream Resource Center, it's looking at health as a form of social justice. So being able to incorporate that across the board. I don't know if I answered your question in that.
No, you totally did. I mean, it sounds like it's, I mean, the awareness and engagement level is just, it can prepare them, and it is actually involving them in a lot of other issues. So it's really interesting. Sangita, I think you had a comment or a question here.
Yeah, so in my case around the Muslim American youth, I've really been struck, sort of knowing what Areli found already, I've been struck with resonance in terms of the telling of stories across using new media. So they're not the same sort of coming out narratives, as coming out as Muslim is not exactly the same as coming out as undocumented, but for many reasons. But there is really this impulse to tell your own story and to speak for yourself and to not have others speak for you. And I did want to ask about, where you Areli and Imelda, where you see this sort of coming out as undocumented. We've sort of talked about its connection to the LGBTQ movement, and where you see that. Do you see that as part of like a larger impulse, or was that something that was really distinctly borrowed from queer politics and queer sort of strategies in terms of the movement there? It's just your perspective on that, because I'm seeing that in the youth that I've been looking at, and I'm really curious what connections we may be able to draw.
So a lot of the leaders within the immigrant youth movement are predominantly queer and women. And there are a lot of strategies that we have borrowed from the LGBTQ movement. For example, coming out, being able to come out of the shadows, share our own story, tell our own narrative, what our experience as like using, I think storytelling has been the most powerful tool that we've had within our immigrant youth movement, and that's something that everyone carries. And in that sense, everyone has strength and power. As far as it being intentional, I don't remember having meetings where it's like, oh, let's look at this movement and kind of see what we can draw from there. But definitely a lot of our immigrant youth being a part of higher education, we've really have had to redefine the purpose of our education, and looking at it as more as a tool to create social change as a way out of poverty for our communities. As far as the intersectionalities within the undocuqueer movement, we recognize that we're not living single-issued lives, but are fighting single-issued struggles. So wanting to be intentional about aligning communities, recognizing those intersectionalities, and forming solidarity and a much larger movement. I think from our end, it's definitely been a lot of education initially to allow people to see the connections and understand why we should be working together.
Thank you, Imelda. I want to add a little bit to that, Sangita, because I think without a doubt, I want to second what Imelda has said about the important role that LGBTQ queer identified youth have played in the undocumented movement. And without a doubt, their agency and their ideas and their own experiences have definitely contributed to making the undocumented youth movement in general what it is. In terms of borrowing, not necessarily borrowing, but definitely adapting the coming out narrative or the coming out, strategy to their own movement, and it's been very effective. But I think it points to two much broader issues, and one is that both the undocumented youth movement and LGBTQ communities are mobilizing in the context of two important things, which is shame, the construction of shame around their identities, and silence, right? Because those two things go hand in hand, right? Silencing practices, how the law silences, how people have to silence themselves around their illegality, in order to survive. So these are two things that are shaping the strategies of empowerment that youth are using, right? So in order to become political, you have to be public, right? How can you be political when you're silencing yourself, when you're operating from a context of darkness, from a context of alienation and estrangement? So I think it's not necessarily just the fact that it's LGBTQ and it's undocumented, but it's the context, the social realities in which youth are living, which is that invisibility, that silencing, right? And those constructions of shame around their stigmatized identities. And I'm working right now not only with undocumented youth, but I'm doing research with other communities. And one of the things that I think undocumented youth have really been able to do is kind of show what a model of transformative organizing is. And transformative organizing really connects, I think, a couple of key things. It is, one, intersectional, so it does definitely organize, not necessarily around the idea of unity, but the idea of difference and how to do that, right? Because even though we kind of categorize undocumented youth in this sort of large umbrella, undocumented youth are so diverse, racially, religiously, linguistically, across gender and sexuality. So that's number one. And number two, I think the key thing that their model of organizing shows is that the powerful effects of connecting body and mind, connecting healing and the personal and the intimate to the political. So I think that's kind of the larger sort of broader framework in which both of the LGBTQ and the undocumented youth are using as tools for social change.
Hey, Leanna, I wanted to get to your comment. We're getting close to the top of the hour. It goes fast, doesn't it? And so I want to keep our comments concise and then give Aurelia a chance to close us out here. But go ahead, Leanna.
Sure. So I'll be super quick, but I mostly have kind of an interesting tidbit from my research, and that is, I guess a little unexpectedly, I found that the young libertarians that I talked to were all very supportive of the Dreamers and their cause because they're really interested in civil liberties. And so I was wondering if you wanted to say or if you know of any other alliances that the Dreamers have built that might be a little unexpected, or how, now that the Dreamers are sort of more recognized on the national stage, how they're sort of partnering with more formal political parties, for instance, like the Democratic Party. They got a mention at the Democratic National Convention. So any of that, I know that's like opening up a big can of worms in the last 2 minutes, but any of that you want to answer is welcome.
Yeah, so there are definitely a lot of alliances, like I mentioned, recognizing parallel depressions within various communities. We've partnered with faith-based organizations, we've partnered with unions, we've partnered definitely a lot of labor work within, especially here in South Los Angeles. If you can imagine because we have undocumented youth in various fields, and there have been a lot of, a lot of existing networks that people have, and when they come out and share their story, often on a very personal level, those alliances start to develop, and then it becomes more formal in terms of partnering with certain organizations, or but it definitely starts at the very personal level. I don't know. Let's see.
I want to.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I want to jump in and just plug in really quick, because you gave us an opportunity to plug Dream Summer, right, Imelda? Yeah. So Dream Summer is this amazing, program. It's going on for 2 years, and what it does is that it places undocumented youth in internships with various organizations, from not just progressive organizations. I mean, they're mostly progressive organizations, but some are, I think, marine life and biology and environmental justice. So it's placing dreamers in these kind of organizations that need the kind of skills that youth bring. So it's a really, really interesting way to kind of see, Leanna, how the youth who have, built this kind of informal built this movement based on sort of networks and friendships and interest-driven things, how it's becoming more formalized, and things like Dream Summer need our support and our resources to continue on.
One thing that comes across, I want to say in your report, is just it just defies sort of so many of the mainstream stereotypes about youth and how the internet and social media is used, and that comes across really strongly. So we are unfortunately at the top of the hour, and so I wanted to thank all of you for the conversation and being a part of this today. I have a long list of many questions I'll have to ask offline, I guess. But anyway, to keep today's conversation going, we encourage anyone to use the Twitter hashtag Connected Learning, and to post in the comments section of this webinar's page in the archive section of www.connectedlearning.tv. And on that same webpage later today, there'll be a full recording of the webinar and all of the curated content, all the things that were mentioned. And the next connectedlearning.tv webinar will be Wednesday, December 5th at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. And it is with Julian Septon Green. And we will be exploring the impact that outside of school learning is having on formal education spaces. So thank you all again for a great conversation, and I appreciate it. And please continue it online on the website. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.